Victoria is our resident cold storage expert. Why don't you explain what cold storage is? It's an alternative subsector of industrial, but what makes it different?
Yeah, so cold storage facilities are specialized industrial buildings, effectively. They're intended to house perishable goods at controlled temperatures, and these can vary from significantly below freezing to kind of the temperature that you would see in a refrigerator at your home. These facilities typically will house product that is food related, so protein, produce, but they also can house other products such as pharmaceutical or even floral.
And is it more expensive to build than traditional industrial?
Yes, and it's a very specialized and operational business, so it is a lot more expensive, and typically you don't want to go the full scope until you've identified the end user, which is why speculative development has been so difficult to achieve in the space.
Yeah, that's very helpful and a good segue into how we identified this space to invest in the first place. We've been very active in traditional industrial, but one of the advantages of our platform is that our private equity team gets to interact and collaborate with our listed securities team. And in our biweekly conversations, it came up that, hey, Americold was the only publicly traded cold storage company at the time. What was doing well, we were seeing some trends, some growth in the need for cold storage. Lineage was one of the largest global cold storage companies. We were seeing that grow and eventually go public. And so there was a lot of momentum in the sector and a lot of future growth. But the inventory that existed was extremely outdated. I mean, the average age was over 30 years. So it wasn't functional. So we looked at, on our team as a value-add investor, and what can we do? Can we go look at these existing facilities and execute a traditional value-add plan where we could improve the functionality, and raise rents? And what we concluded was it didn't really work. You couldn't efficiently deploy capital to solve all the problems to meet modern needs, what the tenants needed. There was definitely a need for new modern supply. So the challenge, though, we had the ability to talk to the management teams at Americold, the folks at Lineage, tour facilities like this one that we're sitting in today. So with that sort of unique year-long worth of homework to really understand what drove the sector, we came to a conclusion that, okay, not only didn't make sense to try and fix the old, but as Victoria mentioned, developing new, it's expensive, and you weren't seeing anyone do speculative development. Why? Because you don't know what the end user needs, how much blast freezing, refrigeration, etc. So our theory was, after speaking with everyone, what happens is, users suddenly have a need for pallet positions. And if a large 3PL, for example, doesn't have space in their existing facilities, they need to then develop new product, which can take 18 months about. So the thesis that we developed was, let's build cold ready, meaning we could tilt the walls and show everyone that this is actually happening. We're not just marketing a site, waiting for build-to-suit users to come. We would cut that lead time in half by get to about 9 months. And then once you tilt the walls, the theory was these users would come. They would have customers in need. They would see that this is already halfway down the road, and then it would morph into a quasi-build-to-suit. And as Victoria's going to explain, that's really what happened with this business plan. So Victoria, we're sitting here at a cold storage site that we developed. We had a thesis, and we went ahead and executed it. Why don't you walk us through the site, the development process, and how we execute our business plan?
Yeah. We really took a top-down approach. So we wanted to identify which market we wanted to be in. That was first and foremost. And Texas was particularly interesting to us because it led the nation in terms of, it was severely under capacity in terms of the existing inventory of cold and the population that it could serve. And then we honed in a little bit more on the specific markets within Texas. We're actively investing in the 4 major MSAs there. So we looked at Houston in particular. It has an existing port, it has an existing population with continued growth, and a lot of existing infrastructure as well. So we ended up finding this particular site that had a couple of advantages compared to others. This one is located very close to the ports, actually within the heavy haul corridor, so that trucks can actually take heavier loads and reduce their truck trips. And then we also had inventory tax abatements. In a cold storage facility, you're housing a lot of product that you have to get taxed on, and the end user would benefit from that.
So you mentioned, in the heavy haul corridor, reducing the number of truck trips. Why is that a benefit to the end user?
Yeah, so labor is a very significant cost, but transportation is also a large part of the overall operations of cold storage. So being able to reduce those truck trips and take heavier loads actually reduces those overall transportation costs to the end user.
That makes sense.
Once we identified the site, we got partnered with a design build contractor that had expertise in the cold storage space. And we de-risked the investment by signing a design build contract. We also had financing in place at closing. And as Jeff mentioned, we didn't want to build to the full scope. We wanted to maintain maximum flexibility so that we can cater to a variety of users.
So another thing that we learned in terms of looking out of the supply chains, where there were still some challenges, the original business plan has ordering the refrigeration units as part of the tenant improvement allowance. But we saw the challenges with the lead time. So can you talk us through how we kind of adjusted the business plan there and how that benefited us?
Yeah, we connected a lot with our REIT teams. We were seeing kind of some of those headwinds already on the supply chain. So we actually pre-ordered the refrigeration units. And again, we weren't going to know the end user, but at least we would still maintain that first mover advantage.
Yeah, that's really important, because I guess that's a good segue. Tell us about where we were in the business plan. Once we went vertical with the walls, so we already had that first mover advantage, and how that played out in terms of leasing interest.
Yeah, a lot of times you won't actually see most of the demand until you go vertical. So as soon as we had those walls up, we did see significant demand spike, and it just so happened that around the time that we were delivering the asset, Lineage particularly had new contracts in Houston, and there were no pallet positions available in the entire MSA. So we, again, maintaining that first mover advantage were the first call that they made.
Yeah, and that touches another point, going back to what we really liked about the sector was just the limited availability. The space was so tight. There's not a lot of pallet positions available, as Victoria mentioned. So, that was kind of a big part of the thesis, was that as folks needed more pallet positions, there wasn't enough new modern functional inventory to meet that demand.
Right.
And we saw exactly how that played out.
Yeah.
So just wrap up sort of, as you mentioned, Lineage was interested along with several others. Where we ended up with them and kind of where we are today.
Yeah, so we delivered the building on time, fortunately, also under budget, and by the time we delivered, we had an executed lease with Lineage for the full building. They also invested significant capital on their own dime to put some infrastructure in the property. So.
And that lease was executed before we even finished the construction.
Exactly.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, so we were negotiating a lease with Lineage before we had even delivered the building.
So it did indeed, per our original thesis, morph into that quasi-build-to-suit for their specific need.
Yes, exactly. Right. Once we identified the end user, then we could go ahead and pour the remaining slabs, build the walls and the pre-demising the building into the material handling equipment sections and all of that.
And they took the entire 315,000 square feet, which is great. So, it's just great. One of the things that I find incredibly fascinating about this business and fulfilling is when you have a thesis, the folks at CenterSquare put our collective brains together and developed a thesis, which was a little bit pioneering at the time in terms of doing spec development and this cold-ready thesis, and then seeing it executed pretty much exactly as we had laid out with a very successful result is indeed exciting.